I am Ethan Matthews, 32 years old, a man with everything society deems successful. A great job in Silicon Valley, a spacious apartment, and a career that was rapidly advancing. However, in one unexpected moment, everything in my life changed forever. That was when I met Clara Wilson. The story began at a company party, where all the employees gathered to celebrate the achievements of the past year. This party was supposed to be just a routine event where people drank and exchanged polite smiles. But for me, it was the place where I met Clara for the first time. I vividly remember that moment. Clara walked into the room with a bright smile, sparkling eyes, and a confident demeanor. She was not the kind of person you could easily forget. Her long, brown hair, lightly curled and tucked behind her ears, made her delicate face even more alluring. She was standing next to Marcus Reed, my rival, who always considered himself the top contender for the next partnership position in the company. An arrogant, ambitious guy who always tried to seem more competent than everyone else. And right now, Marcus was using Clara as a shield. She was just his girlfriend, but to me, Clara had an inexplicable magnetism. "Congratulations," Marcus patted me on the back as I had just been promoted to project manager. "You truly deserve this position, Ethan." I couldn't stop looking at Clara, even though I was trying to maintain professionalism. She didn't pay much attention to me, just smiled and then turned back to chat with Marcus. I knew she was special, but I also realized that Marcus had too much influence in the company. A person who could easily take away what I had. After receiving my award and the congratulations, I heard a soft voice behind me. "Could you give me a ride home? Marcus is busy." I turned around and saw Clara standing there with a lost look in her eyes. She was standing alone, even though it was clear Marcus had left a long time ago. "Of course," I replied without thinking. "It's part of my job anyway." We drove to her apartment. Along the way, we talked about work, about the projects I was working on, and about the dreams Clara harbored. I felt like she understood me better than anyone else. She talked about Marcus, about a relationship that had lasted too long without joy. A relationship that, according to Clara, made her feel like a shadow, a woman always forgotten. "He never knows what I need," Clara said, her voice soft but clear. "It's only work and his ego." I noticed the disappointment in Clara's eyes, an expression I had never seen in her when she was with Marcus. I couldn't help but feel sympathy for her, but at the same time, I realized that the connection between us was not just about sympathy. When we arrived, Clara invited me in for a drink. We sat on the sofa, and the conversation became more natural. She told me about her life before joining the company, the challenges she had faced. Throughout the evening, Clara made me feel like I was in a separate world, where there was no competition and no rivalry. I began to feel that our relationship could grow further. And then, when I was preparing to leave, Clara hesitated. "Ethan," she said softly, "thank you for bringing me home. I really appreciate it." "I'll always help when I can," I replied, trying not to let my emotions show too much. We stood up, and I prepared to leave. But just before I turned to go, Clara unexpectedly held my hand. "You can call me if you want to meet again," she whispered. I couldn't refuse. It was an opportunity one didn't want to miss. The next day, Clara and I made plans to meet again. Gradually, our relationship grew stronger. Long conversations, evening walks through the city, and then long nights together. We seemed to become a vital part of each other's lives. But Marcus didn't let go. He kept a close watch on Clara, trying to find ways to pull her back to him. He even started showing discomfort whenever Clara mentioned me. I knew I wasn't just dealing with Clara. I was also dealing with a man with too much pride. And so, everything started to become more complicated than ever. One beautiful morning, I received a call from Clara. She told me she had been offered a job at a competitor company in Los Angeles. And this time, Clara decided to leave. She would no longer stay in this city. The feeling of being left behind made me feel as if I were falling apart, but at the same time, I could sense Clara's inner turmoil. She didn't want to leave me, but her career was something she couldn't let go of. We'll have time to think about everything, Clara said, her voice weak. But don't worry, we'll try to stay in touch. I didn't reply. Inside, a storm of emotions began to rise. I couldn't let Clara go, but I also couldn't accept her leaving without a clear reason. It seemed everything was changing. Clara left, and I realized I couldn't let this relationship end. We kept in touch through phone calls and messages, but the distance between us only seemed to make our feelings grow deeper. Every time I talked to Clara, I felt like I needed her more and more in my life. The feeling I had now was hard to explain. It wasn't dependence, but a connection I had never experienced with anyone before. Once, when Clara came back to the city to visit family, we decided to meet. That evening, I took her to a restaurant by the beach, the place we had been to when we first started dating. The shimmering lights on the water, the sound of the waves gently crashing against the shore, created a perfect atmosphere for a conversation. You know, I've missed you a lot, Clara said, her eyes filled with affection. Me too, I replied, unable to hide the emotions inside. Our relationship had evolved from light conversations to long nights, never leaving each other. I wanted her to stay with me forever, but I also knew Clara's career didn't allow that. We continued sharing stories, unfulfilled dreams, and things we had long wanted. The feelings between us grew more intense, and I knew I couldn't live without Clara. That's why I began to plan a future together, a future I thought we could build. However, when I started thinking about living with Clara somewhere outside of this city, I felt something wasn't right. Clara began to avoid my calls. She would act strangely whenever we talked about the future, about moving closer to each other. At first, I thought it was just the natural worries of a woman in a growing relationship. But as time passed, I realized that her unease was growing inside her. One afternoon, I visited Clara at her apartment. When I arrived, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked at me oddly, as if I wasn't the person she was expecting. Clara, are you okay? I asked, sitting gently next to her. Clara was silent for a long time, then just nodded faintly. I could see the worry in her eyes. Something seemed to weigh on Clara's mind, but she didn't want to share. I'm fine, Ethan. Just stressed out with work, Clara said, but I could hear the insincerity in her voice. One day, Clara called me and said she had an important decision to make. She had received a dream job offer from a larger competitor in Los Angeles and would have to move there. However, when she said that, I felt an emptiness spreading inside me. Not because I didn't want her to advance in her career, but because I felt we were no longer in sync. Clara, do you really want to leave? I asked, trying not to let my emotions cloud my judgment. She hesitated before answering, and this time, I could see cracks in our relationship. I'm not sure, Ethan, but this is an opportunity one can't pass up. I've thought about this for a long time, and that was the first time I felt that Clara truly wanted to leave me, even though she didn't admit it immediately. I couldn't accept that. Clara was the only one I wanted in my life. I couldn't let this relationship fall apart. The feeling of loss began to rise inside me like an undercurrent. I couldn't let her go without understanding the real reason behind her decision. A few days later, as Clara was preparing to leave the city, I unexpectedly received a call from an old friend at the company. He warned me about some rumors in the office about another relationship Clara had with a man from the company, someone who had a close relationship with Marcus, my rival. I can't believe it. I thought to myself, Clara had lied to me. She had deceived me from the moment we started our relationship. The signs I had ignored all this time now came back to me like deep cuts in my soul. I felt betrayed, and it hurt more than anything I had ever gone through in my life. I couldn't believe that Clara, the woman I thought I would spend my life with, could treat me like this. My heart was filled with anger and pain. I decided that I had to make things clear. I couldn't let her go without an official answer. When I confronted Clara, the tension in the air was unbearable. She was no longer the person I had loved. She was no longer the Clara I knew. Her words now only made me more confused. It was time for me to face the truth. I couldn't stop thinking about the call from my old friend at the company. His words hit me like a slap in the face. Clara had lied to me, and I felt like the whole world was collapsing around me. She was no longer the woman I thought she was, no longer the one I had trusted completely. I couldn't sit still and let things slide anymore. So, I began investigating. I couldn't face Clara without clear evidence. I needed to know how she had betrayed me, and I needed to make things clear before deciding what to do. Everything began one evening. When Clara was working late, I decided to secretly follow her. I didn't want to do anything rash, but I needed to know. I followed her to a cafe where Clara was meeting the man I knew for sure was none other than Marcus. He was the one I had heard the bad rumors about, but I always thought I was just overthinking it. But now, all my suspicions flared up with full force. I saw them sitting in a secluded corner of the cafe, out of sight of the people around them. Marcus said something and Clara giggled, their eyes exchanging unspoken words. I couldn't believe my eyes. Clara wasn't just deceiving me with Marcus. She was doing it right in front of me without any fear. I felt anger rising inside me, but I held back, deciding not to cause a scene. I returned to my apartment, and inside me was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I couldn't let this continue. I decided I had to take action. Things were now at a boiling point. I went to a clinic to get tested because I had been feeling off recently. After the tests, I received results I never expected. I had contracted gonorrhea and chlamydia. I didn't need to guess. Clara was the only person who could have infected me. Every time I thought about it, it felt like thousands of daggers were piercing my heart. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had done so physically as well. This made me feel ashamed, lost trust in myself. I had given all my love, all my devotion to Clara, and now, I was left with humiliation and outrage. When I got home, everything had changed. I no longer looked at Clara with the same loving eyes as before. She walked in smiling as usual, but inside, everything had become cold. She didn't know that I knew the truth, and I decided not to confront her immediately. I needed to have a plan. In the next few days, I started making plans to confront her. I didn't just want Clara to pay for what she had done. I also wanted to make sure I wouldn't be hurt again. I moved my stuff into a hotel room to avoid contact with her, and began to execute a strategy one had been planning in my head. I also decided to go for another test, asking the doctors to delay notifying Clara about my results. This would give me time to prepare the perfect plan to make her pay. A week later, when Clara returned home, I had everything ready, the medications and prescriptions for the STDs. I packed up my things, moved everything to the hotel, and when Clara walked in, I didn't say a word, only informing her of my condition. "Clara, I just got back from the doctor," I said in a cold tone. "I've contracted a sexually transmitted disease, and there's only one person who could have infected me." She stared at me, eyes wide with confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I've been tested, and I know for sure you're the only one who could have infected me," I continued, not giving her a chance to rebut. "You betrayed me, Clara. You lied to me with Marcus, and you didn't just hurt me emotionally. You hurt me physically." Clara froze, unable to speak. She stepped back, her hands trembling. "Ethan, I didn't." "I don't want to hear excuses," I interrupted. "What you need to do now is get tested. And I've asked the doctors to keep everything confidential until I'm ready." I didn't need to say more. Clara understood that everything could never go back to how it was before. She had betrayed me in a way I couldn't forgive. And now, I decided to execute a calculated revenge plan. Things had gone too far. Clara couldn't turn the tide. I decided I wouldn't just be the betrayed person anymore. I wanted to protect myself, protect everything I had built. And Clara would have to pay for what she did. What I did next would change my life completely, and hers as well. When I started executing my plan, everything inside me changed. Since discovering Clara's betrayal, I couldn't let myself keep living in regret and pain. Emotions like anger, hurt, and disappointment were now replaced by a firm resolve. Clara would face the consequences of her actions, But I didn't just want to end this relationship. I wanted her to understand that what she had done couldn't be easily forgotten. I wasn't just the betrayed one. I was the one who could rise from the ruins. I would make Clara realize the value of honesty, respect, and fairness in any relationship. I began preparing everything carefully. First, I found a place to hide. After selling our house and putting all assets into a trust, I decided not only to leave Clara but to disappear from her sight completely. I rented a place in a remote area, surrounded by empty fields on the outskirts of the city. No one would be able to find me. This would be my new base, where I would live under a different name, preparing for the next step in my plan. I started learning about the surrounding areas and decided to move to an Amish community. People there live secluded lives, unaffected by the hustle and bustle of the city. I changed my appearance, cut my hair short, and started wearing Amish-style clothes. I didn't just want to hide. I wanted to create a new identity, a new life. After moving in, I began organizing the documents related to my assets. Everything I did now was part of the plan. I sold all valuable assets, even sold my shares in the company. To protect my wealth and avoid being tracked down, I moved all the money and assets into a trust that only I could control. Clara wouldn't be able to touch a single penny. During this time, I kept in touch with my lawyer, who helped me draft an ironclad prenuptial agreement that would protect my assets, as well as my rights in any situation. I didn't just want a divorce from Clara. I wanted to make sure she couldn't take advantage of anything from me. Finally, I took the most important step in my plan. One afternoon, I forged the documents for the sale of our house and submitted them to be sold to a trust one created. When Clara found out that the house had been sold and she no longer had any ownership of anything, I would be the only one with the power to make decisions. Clara didn't know that I had already started the divorce. I kept everything secret, and I was sure she couldn't contact me, as I had changed my address and even my phone number. I also contacted the authorities to handle the situation with my condition discreetly. In the final days before I completely moved to my new home, I reached out to the doctors at the clinic and requested they provide detailed information about Clara. She wouldn't be able to avoid responsibility forever. On the final day when Clara found out everything had been prepared. I was no longer the man she had once loved. No longer the weak, vulnerable man. I had turned into someone else, someone who could face the biggest challenges in life. And she, Clara, would have to learn the lesson of betrayal. When I decided to send Clara the divorce papers, she couldn't take it. She couldn't deny that she was wrong. Everything was now clear, and she had no place to run. The day of the divorce, Clara was completely stunned. As I sat across from her in the courtroom, I could feel the pain and despair in her eyes. She couldn't accept that her life had changed. She had once thought she would have everything: love, career, and family. But now, it was all shattered. When my lawyer presented the evidence of Clara's betrayal, she could no longer justify herself. The medical evidence proved I was not the father of the baby she was carrying. She stood still, her eyes blank and confused. And as the trial proceeded, the court ruled that she would only receive a symbolic amount, $1, according to the prenuptial agreement we had signed. I didn't feel happy seeing Clara fail, but I felt relieved knowing that everything had been resolved fairly. I had not only kept my assets, but also regained my self-respect. Life after the divorce, I started a new chapter. In the Amish community, I lived a simple yet peaceful life. I no longer had to worry about Clara or the lies of the past. I worked hard, helped those around me, and enjoyed the quiet days. Clara, after losing everything, seemed to have undergone a profound change. She was no longer the same person. She lived a solitary life, went to work, and only returned home when necessary. But that no longer concerned me. I had found peace in my heart and learned the lesson that in life, sometimes we must accept change and let go of things that no longer serve us. No one has the right to deceive or betray others without facing the consequences. Respect and honesty are the core values of any relationship. Even though we may have to endure pain and hardship, in the end, Only resilience and righteousness bring true peace and happiness.